according to Gartner, nearly 75% of organizations expect to multiply the amount of major change in initiatives. And they will be undertaking these initiatives during the next 3 years. But without the adequate approach to inspire change in an organization, these initiatives, most of them are likely to fail. Very often, the responsibility of introducing new ideas and putting these ideas into motion fall into the shoulders of the leadership team. But moving an organization into leadership, into a leadership that is driving the change is a tough challenge. That's why I have invited Tony Martignetti to share his insights on how to inspire people in times of cultural change. Let me tell you a little bit more about Tony. So, before becoming a leadership development advisor, he was a finance and strategy executive with experience working with some of the world's leading life science companies. Tony is also the host of a podcast called The Virtual Campfire. And this podcast, in fact, talks about the transformation journey of leaders. And let me tell you sincerely, so it is because of his book that really I had a lot of curiosity. So he's the author of the book, Climbing the Right Mountain, Navigating the Journey to an Inspired Life. And the thing is that while most of the books that are made to help leadership, making them performing, like kind of climbing the mountain with performance, he talks instead about, are you in the right mountain? And this is something that I find quite interesting. Thank you very much, Tony, for making it today. I'm so excited because before this the recording, we already had like a little bit of a feeling that our paths were quite similar. But what I wanted to understand, Tony, is what drove you from this amazing experience that you have in the pharma world, in executive level of positions, into moving into supporting leaderships finding the right mountain?
I love the question. And I'll just start by saying, I love the intro. You first of all, you make my name sound so good, because in the US, we just can't pronounce Martignetti the way that we do in outside of the US. So thank you. And I will say that what did get me to climb the right mountain, it was quite a journey for me to get here. And what started me on this path was burnout. I was in that moment of really having this sense of like detachment from my life. It wasn't all bad. I mean, I had made a lot of impact in my journey in the corporate world, but what I found myself doing was just feeling like I was serving a purpose that wasn't mine. And I got stuck in a pattern, in a rut. And I was depressed, burnt out, and didn't know who I was any longer. So I started to have these moments of saying, well, what is it all for? What am I here for? And slowly but surely, I dug out of my darkest points and started to move towards, like, how can I create something better? Well, the real moment that lit me up was sitting in a boardroom at a biotech company and looking around the room. And I had at this point had a little bit of awakening, but I had looked around the room and saw that the leaders in this room were not focused on what was right for the patient or what was right for the people in the room. They were just worried about what was right for them and their own self-image preservation, if you will. And I said to myself, like, wow, this isn't what I want. I think I've come to this place where I think I need to do something different. And I think my purpose is to change the way people show up as leaders, to inspire people. I mean, we're in an industry where we save lives. We can't be wasting lives. And so I decided to get up and walk out. And I decided that I'm going to leave this room to change the room. It wasn't clear what that was going to look like, but I knew that my path was set at that point to do something different with my life that was going to be more purposeful and connected to changing leaders and how they show up. And that was the start of a new chapter.
This is great. The thing is that we don't realize how difficult and how much courage we need to have in order to first identify that we are not doing the thing that is meaningful for us, to accept already that. It is very
Yeah.
tough because we have been doing it. We have been making money. We got recognition, status from others. We even are scared about our families, even though they don't really care about our title. We are
Yeah.
scared about that. Our family, they deserve to have the best. I need to be in that position. So we stay in the path that we have been already climbing, but not being sure that we are in the right path. The second level of courage, or the second step of courage, is when you decide that, okay, I recognize and acknowledge that I'm in the wrong path, but now do I get the hell out of it or not? Do I have the cojones to go and do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And what is it exactly? What is it that I'm going to do? Because that's when you have to start listening to the clues that have been laid out for you all along. So I love what you tapped into there. And there were a lot of doubts that showed up immediately after I had that moment. And they weren't just self-doubts. There were doubts that came from all well-meaning people in my life saying, are you sure you want to do this? You're giving up a lot of great safety. But the reality is, in order for us to really grow, we have to let go of the things that we've gotten comfortable with. That's why they always say that growth happens outside of your comfort zone. Well, it's true. You have to be able to say, hey, in order for me to become the person I want to be, I have to let go of the person that I have been and now allow this person to emerge. And that's going to require a lot of things that are going to scare the living crap out of me.
Indeed. It is almost similar. So a person, an individual, is also similar in terms of the type of courages that we need in order to transform ourselves. And so coming back to the topic of organizations, so it is also tough for an organization to change. So based on the observations out of your career in senior leadership positions, what would you say are the factors that determine that you are successful transitioning during these corporate transformations? So
yeah, well, I love that you bring this do a great shift into really understanding how change happens inside organizations and how to do it effectively. And I think it starts with really crafting that journey for people, that they need to know about how this change is happening or how it will happen. And I think of 5 things that are really crucial: communication, planning, support, resources, and flexibility. I'll say those again, and I'll get into them a little more detail. Communication, planning, support, resources, and flexibility. And those all sound very kind of like prescriptive, but there's elements of this, which is to say, how do you ensure that people know what is happening? And there's real transparency. You're clear with people about what's going to happen and where you're going to, even if it's uncertain. I mean, there's been a lot of uncertainty around a lot of changes that have happened to us as a society, or as even as organizations. And so they have to know that even if it's not 100% clear, that what is the benefit of actually moving from a state of inertia, of staying where you are, to a place where you're actually going to make a shift. The planning part of it is that, as you're starting to put plans in place, you're making sure that you understand what are the steps that we're going to go through. Maybe there's phases to it, that you're not just going to leap from zero to 100 overnight. Yeah. And support. The key thing is that, when people are going through change, they need to know that there's other resources available to them, that, there's people who are going to help them along the way. If there's questions, if they run into a roadblock, who's going to be there to help them through that? So making sure there's support along the way. And that goes hand in hand with resources. You can't just change the way people always say about changing the wheels as you're going down the highway. And sure, that works to some extent, especially for startups, because that's what you kind of have to be limited by. But you want to make sure that you're also thinking, what are the things that we need to be successful in the change endeavor to make sure we get to the end successfully. And then lastly, flexibility. Nothing as we plan, everything we plan can also fall apart. And so we have to make sure we're flexible in facing the things that show up as we move through that change. So flexibility is important. All along the way, communication is the fuel along that journey. And that was a long answer, so I apologize.
I love it because it covers the things that are essential. But let's play a little bit the devil's advocate. So you tell me this is how you do, I don't know, pizza. Let's say, okay, now it looks super cliched, Tony, that I brought pizza. But anyways, let's say that it is about making pizza, but behind doing an awesome pizza, there will be the art. And I have the impression that, so in what you say, these are the key milestones, the key, if you want, the recipe to do it, but to do it awesome, we need to consider a couple of things that are super hard for leaders. Like, one is to have the bandwidth, the mental bandwidth to, communicate. We get tired of communicating. We are all absorbed with the stressful deadline, stressful targets. Can I get the bandwidth to make it happen? And the other thing is about, and I don't know how to call it in reality, it's about that we as humans, we believe that because I have said it once, everybody has understood it. But it's not true. In reality, you need to reinforce whatever you're saying, like 10 million times, so that you have really covered everybody, because we have this incapacity sometimes to empathize, to be in the other shoes. Like, we say something during a conference, okay, but maybe not everybody pay attention, or maybe the way it was understood, it was not the correct way. How do we continuously reinforce? So reinforcing and bandwidth is a bloody challenge for leaders. How can we overcome that stuff?
Yeah, I love what you shared, because that's exactly, what I'm leaning into next. And I think there's three things that come to mind around this, and I'll share them super quick. Number one is you have to have space to be able to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, and you're also being clear about what I need as I'm navigating this. Any change happens first inside your mind, and inside the mind of the leaders, and inside the mind of the people who are driving that change. If they haven't prepared themselves mentally for that journey, then it's going to be hard for them to bring other people along. They're the ones who are catalyzing that change, and the people who start to go along as the leaders of that change have to be mentally prepared to help others along that path. So I think space is a critical first step to getting people there. And then, as you said, the repetition, that, it has to be said multiple times. And we think it's like an echo chamber because we are saying it in our minds. But the fact of the matter is that people, are not us. They need to hear it a couple times, and then it really starts to settle in. This is important, right? So I think that repetition, that reinforcement of the message is also so crucial along the way. And then the third part of it is to make sure that you're empathizing with people, that you're understanding it. Like, hey, how am I checking in with the people on this path? Are they feeling things the same way I am? Probably not. So really understanding, like, how are things going from your perspective? Not just, are we on target, but how are you feeling about the change? How are you feeling about the journey that we're going on?
It is a big shift, especially in times of change. It's almost like leaders are not anymore they are not a messenger of change, but they are the drivers or the catalysts or whatever you want to call it, but they are initiators. So it's almost like a guerrilla approach. You are alone. That's a lot of pain as a leader. So these times where we believe that the leader's role is to earn a lot of money and just give orders is certainly gone, because it's not what is expected from organizations. their leaders should be driving the change, and it needs a lot of effort, because already this empathizing, I can tell you already, like having Zoom after Zoom is already tiring. So imagine that when you have a workforce where you have to work together with 20 different people, it is something that is quite demanding mentally. And I love what you say. Is change, it starts in yourself. If building the capacity to drive it, you cannot just go and jump and do it. No, you need to have this mental bandwidth to make it happen.
Yeah, I want to add something in here, and this is completely unprompted, but I'll just share it because it came to mind. Is I think the best leaders of change are curators and storytellers. You know, when you're a curator, you know how to bring the right elements of people together, the right expertise, and you're also looking across multiple areas to say, like I'm bringing some ideas from this field, I'm bringing ideas from this industry or from this discipline, and I'm bringing those into this project to help solve this problem in a different way. And they know that they're not going to have all the answers, so they know they need to curate the expertise from different places in the organization or outside of the organization. And then storytelling, you know, the key part of this is that in order for someone to get on board with change, they need to be engaged in the story that you're trying to tell. Not that it's made up, but that it's a story that they can believe in. And so a great leader is all about creating a story that engages people in the process of being in that journey. Would you agree?
I do, and almost I was thinking, you are giving me almost a part of the definition of what would be inspiration, to inspire someone. So it's partially storytelling, it's partially curating. What else would you add to define to have your own definition of what is inspiring people?
Yeah, it's connecting with people's the spark that's inside of them. And I don't mean to go, I may lose people here, but I'll go with what I think is real. What I think is real is that each one of us has something inside of us that motivates us and moves us forward. And I call it the spark. And that is where we sometimes lose sight of what it is that lights us up. And when a leader can get to understand what drives that person, or what can get people out of their seats and want to show up every day and want to bring themselves into this room, then that is what's going to inspire them into action and do things that are sometimes seemingly impossible, but because they've connected with what they're wired for, then that is what inspiration's about. It's about getting people to be sparked up and lit up from the inside, and seeing how that moves people into action. That makes all the difference. Now, everyone has different motivations. So the key thing is how can you motivate the masses as much as possible, and then find ways to have other people ignite the sparks of others. So it's almost like a ripple effect.
That's totally right. I have seen it a little bit, and I wanted to share it with you, that sometimes leaders believe that, especially during the times of change, it's very difficult for anyone to go into change, and psychologically to be moved in an area of volatility, uncertainty, and that drives fear in our brain, and then this fear creates a natural resistance for change. So, and what you said is quite, it looks super logical. If I get people to be inspired, but to be part of the change, to convert them, to convert them somehow. But it's not a conversion that is done by constantly repeating, the company needs to change, that's it. No, it's how do I involve that person to be part of the solution? And it's not me telling him, so these are the 5 things that we need to do in order to change. No, it's making them contribute to that change so that they become the change. And that is very difficult, right, to do. And very often it's a mistake that organizations do. They do publicity posters about let's change together and all that stuff. That specifically is what makes people have even more resistance. As long as you're doing advertising, it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the what's in it for me. Like if you haven't, people start asking what's in it for me. If there's like no connection to what I want as an employee or as someone who's part of it being what's being changed, then you've lost me. So the key thing is you have to find a way to connect with that. And so I always think about the 5 whys, like the exercise of asking why a couple of times. So if you ask, why are we changing? And the surface is like, because we need a change. But if you have to like ask a couple more times and say, what's the real reason? Like, why are we doing this? And eventually get to that real honesty of this is the reason behind it all. And if it's something that's so powerful that other people can say, well, of course, that makes a lot of sense. And not only that, but it drives me to want to do that because I can see how that is something that I want to be part of. And I can see how this connects to my reason for wanting to change too. So
yeah. Tony, so in your career, I want to, because your career is divided in one part where you were in these senior leadership positions, and the other one where you were helping leaders to move on to find the right mountain.
yeah.
What would you say are the most common mistakes that leaders do during cultural change?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I would say the communication is a starting point. The lack of communication and this assumption that they think it's happened, but it hasn't been enough and it hasn't gone deep enough. So that's the number one. Number two, they haven't built trust. They haven't gotten people to really understand and trust them along this journey of creating what they think is a very reasonable path to change. So they have to make sure that trust is there first. Otherwise, the communication falls flat. Otherwise, they don't engage people in this process. And then the last part is the accountability is important. People have to know that they're being held accountable to results along this path of change. If you're part of the change initiative, like what is my part that I'm playing in that change? If you're not holding people accountable, then what happens is they just think, oh, we'll get to it when we get to it, and just kind of like move along. There's a sense of this, which is the balancing act. You have to be compassionate with people about holding them, in the sense of I care deeply about you and I want the best for you. And if there's something that comes up, we can talk about the challenge you're facing. But I want to hold you accountable to what we said we're going to accomplish, because that's how we get things done together as a team.
I want to highlight one of my favorite topics, which is the concept of trust, because very often there is leaders who believe that trust is built by the fact that there is an agreement between you and me. You have a salary, you do your job. that's the agreement. But don't trust that is a transaction. And people underestimate that trust is just like, okay, we're a bunch of hippies, we're hugging each other, we love each other, and stuff like that. No, it is about how do you make a team of people who have some common interests and some individual interests to stand with each other. A little bit like it would be like in a football team that is not about individual stars, but together they're successful. When you know a little bit about football, maybe not the Americans, but okay, when you know a little bit about football, you know that Manchester United, the best teams that they had, it was always when there was no real star, but all together they were winning cup after cup. You can see this element of trust. Well, this time in America, for instance, who are involved in many defense acts, like in the army, where people are counting on each other. They know that they can rely on the people next to them in order to save their lives. And so trust is not just this feeling of that we are working together. It is we are counting on each other in order to be successful on achieving that common goal. So it's not as simply like this new age vision that we're dancing together. It is more than that. and it's super important in order to drive success in organizations.
Yeah. And there's something about what you shared, which has me thinking about how like people have this one way look at what trust looks like. There's many layers to trust. Like there's a sense of reliability trust, and there's also a sense of care trust. Like do the people around me care about my interests, care about me as an individual? But reliability trust is another part. Like, do I trust that the people around me are going to be reliable with what I expect from them? Will they reliably give me results when I ask them to give me results? And I think that nuance is important too. Yeah.
Totally. Then it makes me also think about, well, we have that in common. Probably you have also kind of a Latino background, a Latin background, where family is the core of the situation, and in the family business. So you can be on the table eating and all the stuff, and everybody's yelling to each other, not listening correctly. But at the end, that if there is a problem, you know that somebody's going to stand by you when there is really needed. And what any leader should understand is not about the perfection. It's not about how sweet you are with each other, holding hands. It is about being blunt. It is about being a little bit disorganized, messy, but in times where it's needed, that the cohesion and the common goal stands out behind all of this incredible Latin way of interacting.
Yeah, I love what you shared, because it's, first of all, it's hilarious, but it's also so right on the money. And there's a sense of like trust is not always like a sweet thing. It's also sometimes it can be really ugly and messy, but also at the end of the day, it's what's most needed when we go through challenging times. We need someone who can be able to say, hey, I'm gonna have you back even when you do things that are not quite right.
Yeah.
Because I trust that ultimately your intentions are good and you want to do the right thing. Sometimes you're gonna fall down, and that's why I'm here.
Exactly. Tony, what would you say could be the right way or a good way to prepare people? So let me put it in a different manner. So let's say that magic one situation. So you get to be the CEO in one Fortune 500 company, and you know that there needs to be a change in the next 6 months. How do you use these 6 months to prepare your organization for that big change?
Oh, it's a great question. And, obviously this is something that is happening all the time. I think the first starting point is to make sure that people are building the skills of adaptability, because they have to be ready to be able to flex and form into what's happening next. If you have people on your team who are just not ready to make a change, then it's going to be hard for you to help them through that process. It's going to be a lot more challenging for you to move them through that process. I think everything that's happened over the past few years has allowed a lot of us to become more adaptable, to realize that we can't be too fixed in our thinking. So I think any leader who's going to be moving a team through a change should start to put a foundation in place to get them change ready, and allow them to say, how can we be more adaptable? How can we build trust? How can we ensure that we have those skills that we need to navigate this next chapter? And that's mostly not technical skills. Sometimes it's those soft skills, as we call it. Well, as they call it, and I hate to call them soft skills, but those things that we need to be able to navigate the challenging times. So I think setting a foundation to be ready to move through change and know that it's going to be challenging, but if you have these things, you'll be ready.
You made me think that back in the days in my corporate life, one of the things that I hated the most is throwing money for trainings. And because you are talking about adaptability, you're talking about trust. And I say, what the hell? This is not something that you learn in a training room. It is a meta skill. It is it is a mental process. So how do you do that? How do you embark into an 14500 organization and you say, okay, adaptability, trust? Is there a better way than just the traditional training?
Yeah. Yeah. And part of it is really kind of doing it in small little experiments and small little steps they can take on in their jobs, finding ways for them to work together and challenging each other to build those skills. How am I building trust in the work, in little micro experiments, right? First of all, I think the biggest I love this quote, and this comes from Eckhart Tolle. Awareness is the greatest agent of change. And when you think about that, if we don't become aware of what the things that we need to work on, then it's hard for us to make changes in those areas. So when you think about, these things like trust, like if we want to work on trust, then we need to find a way to experiment and practice trust. So find ways in the current work environment to practice trust. That might mean, hey, work with a colleague and find ways to say, how can I ensure that I'm giving more ownership and more trust in that person? That's how you can do that. The same thing goes to adaptability, setting certain parameters, like, for example, put in constraints for a project and say, how would I approach this project, this current project that I'm working on, with a smaller budget or in less time? And by putting those constraints in place, it allows a person to change their thinking about, wait a minute, how could I adapt in this situation to do things differently, given less resources or less time, just resource. Make sense?
It makes sense. I was thinking that today, if you can count the number of organizations that can adopt alternative ways of learning. You mentioned Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
We can discuss about Eckhart Tolle in a different setup, but the fact is that what he's teaching is something that can start with a lot of self-awareness. It is a little bit of mindfulness. And really, when you Google, you find a couple of companies who are using this type of practice. I know that Google does it with search inside yourself. I know that Facebook has another program that is quite similar, or maybe a copy of Google, God knows. But so there is a huge resistance for alternative ways of learning that really could help people to understand better where they are situated, to understand better how they can experiment by themselves, because experimentation cannot be always dictated. Experimentation means that I know the process, and maybe this thing it will work for me, but maybe not. So I need to be able to quickly have some data that will tell me this is wrong for Ivan, and move on with another little experimentation. And already learning this experimentation, you can call it like micro habits or Kaizen mode, or whatever you want to call it. There is 10 million names for this, but it is rooted in human psychology. It's rooted on the way of, this is how we learn to decide on ourselves and develop intrinsic motivation to do whatever the hell we want to do in our lives.
Exactly. I want to take that and just to take it to the next level, because I think there's a sense of what you're sharing is people, when they first face an obstacle or challenge, it's like, it becomes overwhelming. So they think like, oh, I can't do that because it's just too much. And so the first thing that I often share with people is like, this model I use, it's called expand your vision, narrow your focus. And the reason why I use that is because oftentimes we don't see the possibilities in the situation because we're only looking at the wall that we're facing. And it's become so daunting that it's like, oh, I guess I can't move on. But if you move away from it and you look expansively and see what other possibilities are available, then you can start to say, oh, there is something I can do. And in the one step, if I take one step towards that, narrow my focus, then I can start to get unstuck and start moving towards something. And so I think that is kind of aligned with what you're sharing, is a sense of like the micro steps that I can take start to get you in this path of seeing like this unsurmountable challenge is actually not that unsurmountable. I just have to start experimenting with these little things that will get me to learn the path to where I need to go.
That's terribly right. Just I wanted to add my parenthesis because you make me think about Eckhart Tolle, and the reason is that I always have him in my mind because since the moment I started reading what he writes, and I think that he wrote, the first book it was that I read, it was The Power of Now.
Yeah.
I have a scientific background, so there is a lot of truth on what he says, but when he starts mixing science, he's a little bit off for me because that is part of, so what he says is true. The way he explains it sometimes is a little bit too crazy for me. That's a reality.
Yes.
This German,
everyone goes off the reservation a little bit when it comes to science.
yeah, he drives me nuts, this German, because every time that I find someone who's telling me about Eckhart Tolle, I need to put it on the table. It's incredible. Anyways, that was my parenthesis about Eckhart Tolle, and I have the same for some Indian gurus. I have the same type of comments. Tell me one thing. So, is there a way to decide like an awesome pathway for leaders in order that they're equipped really to inspire others for change? Is there like a no, I wouldn't say that like secret sauce because there will be always specificities, but like topics that they need to be to learn so that they are ready to drive the change in organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I will share that it's not rocket science. I mean, it's not like it doesn't have to be some magic formula, but I think there are a few quick things that leaders can do, and it starts with first starting with a clear idea of what they want to create for people, and making sure they communicate it well. So that clear articulation is important, and then modeling it. You can't just give people something and say, we're going to do this and we're going to cut costs and everyone's going to get on board. And then they go off and they sail away on their yacht. And I'm not saying that that's probably a bad example, but you model the way by doing things yourself that you want other people to do, whatever that might be. So modeling is an important aspect of this. So ensuring that you're connecting with that idea of modeling. And then the last part is empowering people. If you want people to change, you have to give them the space and the ability to make decisions that align with that change. So I think this sense of really seeing that I want people to be able to have the freedom to operate within the confines of what we're trying to create. And confines is a bad choice of words, but there's this container you create when you say what we're trying to do is this, but there's how we do it is not necessarily cut in stone. So I want to give you the opportunity to get ideas together. Like, how do you want to go about this? What is your own unique spin of your part of the change that you want to create? So you don't have to feel like it's just dictated to you. Go do this, do it this way, do it like I said it, to do it. Instead, give them the agency and the sense of how I can operate within that. Make sense?
Indeed. And what stays in my mind, it is this part that it is very often put aside, is the power of role modeling. So in the systems of communication are behaviors. So the way we act, you are going to observe it, and our brain has these kind of mirror neurons that will mime the behaviors. And on top, I'm communicating that whatever I'm doing is the right thing. Let's imagine that I'm someone in the leadership team and I'm doing something different of what I'm claiming. So there is first information, do this in that way. Second information, he's doing it that way. And he's rewarded for doing that thing. So I'm going to mime the behavior. The behavior will have a higher part on the hierarchy because it is rewarded, because he's there, because he's behaving in that way. So, and very often I have seen organizations where there is leadership who are doing all of the efforts for communicating verbally what should be done, how it should be done sometimes, that is not always the right thing to do, but behaving in another way. Obviously, I'm going to mime the behaviors that are rewarded, and naturally, because we are kind of monkeys, we understand these things without telling us in words that this is the right thing to do. So role modeling the wrong behaviors, it is something that is going to have definitely a bad impact. And I have seen it very often. And sometimes, and I want to get back to how we initiated the discussion because you mentioned burnout, and it's something that we have historically a similar story is that burnout don't always come because you have been overworking for hell. It comes also because of this cognitive dissonance that you are living, where the environment that you are in doesn't match with what is expected, what you expect from yourself and what is expected from others. And then that breaks a person because it's not in line. It is the messages are constantly not in line with what is being said, and that breaks a person.
Yeah, I think the word comes around like dissonance, like the sense of like disconnection between what you want and what is currently available in that environment, and the lack of control that also comes in mind. So yeah, I agree. There's so many parts to burnout. People always think it is that, I guess, just overworking yourself. But if you're overworking yourself, it's probably because you don't understand what is the true sense of who you are and what you want. And you're not pushing back respectfully into that place of, what do I need to do to take back control of not just my life, but also what it is that this environment is doing to me? I think that's a big aspect of how burnout can be. You can fight back, but you need to first feel empowered internally, and that's hard. It's a hard shift.
Tony, I really love this discussion. I think we need to do more of these discussions, talking about how to inspire change, because mentioned, so most of organizations are ongoing changes. People are ongoing changes. People wants to change, but they don't know how. And it's very difficult to do it, like either by reading books or by talking to yourself. It is super difficult. I have tried. It is super difficult. So, and I think this needs a little bit more of discussions, more of options about what is the best way for an individual to embark into change. Tony, how can people reach you out to discuss change, to discuss the type of person that I want to be, if I am in the right mountain or if I am in the wrong one? What is the best way to reach you out, Tony?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And I agree wholeheartedly. It's great to have people on the journey with you who can help to just be able to to create the space for you to check in and see how they can help you. So the best place you can find me is on my website, inspiredpurposecoach.com. And there you can find a whole bunch of things, including my website for, my link to the podcast, the Virtual Campfire, and my books on Amazon, Climbing the Right Mountain. My next book is in the works, so keep posted. And then the other place you can find me is LinkedIn. Okay.
Okay. So I will put these links, but then now I'm very curious. What is the topic of the next book, Tony?
Oh, it's called Campfire Lessons, how to use your story to propel you forward. And really what it is a sense of like, there's a lot of things that we have to dig into our past to understand and use as fuel to move us forward. We have to look forward, but we also have to make sure we look back from time to time and understand what is it that was about my past that I need to respect and honor and include as I move into the future.
Okay, you made me think about another guy, a psychologist. What's his name? Gabor Mate, who is always talking about getting back to the past to heal a couple of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. That's great.
Thank you very much, Tony, for your time. I really appreciate that you had a little bit of time for this podcast. I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much.